Thank you very much, you two, for organizing this great event. I would like to tell you a little bit about a project that my colleagues and I at GRAFT had worked on for about two and a half years now. It's an ongoing project, and that really taught us to question the traditional ways of architectural planning and urban design. And that's why we love to continue with this project, and I would like to take you on a little trip that tries to make us think out of the box as far as planning our future. We all know we live in an urban age. You have recognized probably some years ago in the year 2006. Since then, we have more people living in cities than in rural areas. And that is very clearly why. That's clearly because in the cities we meet people. In the cities we have cultural exchange, we have access to energy, we have access to global mobility. So there's lots of reasons to go there. And first and foremost, many people go to cities because they look for economic growth and look for jobs. So we embrace that, and we think that's the way we can solve and negotiate the future. But of course, we also see some of the side effects if we're not blind. And among those are that we still cannot build proper cities that avoid that we have buildings that consume 78% of all the electric energy that we're producing. We still build buildings that are responsible for more than 40% of the CO2 emissions, greenhouse gases. And of course, we have not really resolved the problem of the lack of public transport that causes massive individual mobility. But there are side effects and collaterals that are actually even worse. We realize that in the bigger cities, the mega cities as we call them, we apparently seem not to be able to catch up with the pace of growth. We see informal settlements, we see suburbs, slums all over the place that teach us that we might not have a proper idea or concept how to deal with the fact that we try to get together and communicate with each other. So while looking at the figures and realizing that the megacities all over the world grow, we kind of have no real understanding of a rural drowning that happens at the same time. So we should ask ourselves really, and that was what we really became fascinated by, to ask why do people leave their homes and families, the rural areas, and what do they leave behind? So come on with me and look at this map that you probably know. That's the world at night, and usually we look at all the illuminated areas. That's where we live, that's where we meet, that's where we travel. But there's a huge part of the world that's dark at night. That's the area without any access to electricity. At the same time, if you overlay that with another map, you realize that the strongest solar radiation that could help us solve our energy problems is in these dark areas. So did we ever ask ourselves how to make that useful and change the fact that people leave their rural communities? That is what we tried then to look at and that we started to study. Some of you might know that we have 1.5 billion people without access to electricity. That's 16% of the world's population, and they still lack access to any sort of a grid connection. At the same time, most of these people spend lots of their income on substitutes, on kerosene that they use in their kerosene lamps, or they spend it on candles or paraffin, all these kinds of substitutes that are necessary because there's no access to electricity. At the same time, the longing for communication and for education is growing, and that's the motivation for people to move to cities. That's a great image that I found in a newspaper that shows that a cell phone has become the most wanted object and like the tool to get in contact with the world. So when you look at the numbers, it's surprising that all over Africa, especially sub-Saharan Africa, but also in Southeast Asia and in Southern America, mobile phones are everywhere. for example, in sub-Saharan Africa, 75% of all households have a cell phone or have access to a cell phone. But there's no electricity. People walk 5 hours to the next city just to charge their cell phone. And that's a major problem. It's a strange fact that needs to be resolved. And they pay a lot of money even for every single time they charge their cell phones. So when we were working on a project in Addis Ababa, working in a hospital there, we came across and we met a German lawyer, Andreas Spieß, who brought to our attention an idea was what seems to be out there all over the place, the idea of a solar kiosk. And we started to talk about this and started to think about how could we produce energy and make it accessible, even sell energy in a little shop unit to make it accessible for everybody in the countryside who could go there, charge their cell phone or charge a rental lamp even. We looked at the numbers and found out that such a kiosk could even have a solar fridge running on 12 volt on very low voltage, and studied that thing. And as we are architects, we tried to design it in a very fashionable way, try to make it really precious and really something different to what people would expect from a solar kiosk in Africa. You would maybe think of a mud hut or something like that with a solar panel on top, but we said no, it should be a very, very nicely designed object, because we believe that design is not a first world privilege. Everybody's looking for beautiful objects, and we, up until today, insist that a kiosk like this should be a very, very precious object. So we looked at that kiosk, what it could do, what the potential might be, all kinds of virtual, and thought there must be an operator, of course, that runs this kiosk. What could it do? A solar fridge could maybe help to cool down drinks, something that's very rare in rural areas. Or you could offer people the possibility to store food there, or use it as a health post, have medicine cooled in there. Of course, provide access to internet, but if you think it further, then it could also be used in many other uses and little businesses like barber shops, or could be used as a source to run water purification systems. So the important aspect then became not to just look at the architecture, but to ask, what should this little box provide? And we studied what you could do with that very limited amount of energy that can be generated in such a box, and studied, there could be some web access that you could sell, or have people pay a very minimal amount of money for. Computer and software could be made accessible there, maintenance and services, security services, but mostly, of course, the process of charging batteries, cell phones, lamps. Of course, from the beginning we thought that it might help to sell products through the refrigerating foods and drinks, but also medicine, of course, but all kinds of products that are related to cell phones as well. So suddenly for us, in the focus, the operator of this kiosk became more the focus of our studies. That was very important. And of course, the understanding and the notion that if you ever provide access to power, then that would help to give access to information, and that this would in the end also create a new marketplace. So maybe that could be, we started to understand that this could maybe be a tool to really change people's lives in the rural areas. Also, modern technology can provide more than affordable power, but private communication and individual information access. So when we started thinking about all this, we realized, of course, you need to visualize to convince people of such a concept. And as far as we're architects, we produce lots of renderings showing what a hut like this could provide. And if you imagine local communities, rural communities being able to follow soccer games during the World Cup in South Africa, that is a vision. That is something that we were really trying to work for. But if you look at a village like this, with a little hut. Some of you might have looked it up in the image, that in the end, at night, is the only source of light in the village. Then you can imagine that the use of such a little box could also be to become a local center of communication where people gather, meet, exchange their ideas, and so on. And we did some of these drawings and renderings showing that it is not only about solar energy and photovoltaics that we thought about, but that you could also power telephone, cell phone antennas. You could come up with a very open technical systems that are that allow you to even plug in small wind turbines to come up with a modular setup that can grow over time and maybe even react to the very different local conditions in each local community. So at this point, when we got there, the architect woke up again and tried to find out how could we come up with a very intelligent architectural system based on a structural frame, lightweight aluminum frame that then can be closed either with very simple wall panels made out of clay or local construction materials like bamboo walls, but that could also provide or give the possibility to plug in and work with high-end materials when asked in other locations. So I started to think about how could this box maybe grow and adjust to local conditions, rendered these images showing that the aluminum box that we designed could modularly grow in an elemented fashion, and at this point we're ready to go for a next round of financing. Actually, we found 2 more people who came on board, lawyer Ulrich Müller and Holger Feist in Germany, and found some financing to really try and roll it out and really try and test it. So together we decided to build a first prototype and find out if that box could really work. In the beginning, all parts we thought could have been and could be produced in Germany. We thought of a very lightweight system out of aluminum components that easily could be shipped, built this prototype, put solar panels on top, and got down to a working prototype that generates energy, feeds them into a set of batteries and stores enough energy to run it for 3 days without solar radiation. So we proved that it could work in a little exhibition that we had last year in Berlin, and we're all pretty happy that we got that far, but realized that actually there was a very long way in front of us. Because the next step, of course, is to really test it under local conditions. So we studied all the climatic information from all over Eastern and Central Africa, where we are now actually trying to implement the kiosks. We actually applied for funds from the German government and got some financing from them for an R&D process to study cooling of the components, the electrical components. We found ways to cool down the batteries by sinking them into the ground, which extends the lifespan of the batteries. We found ways to cool down the electrical components, cool the solar panels on top of the kiosk by ventilating them from the back. That extends lifespan and also efficiency and so on. So you maybe see that we really try to solve it like German engineers, not doing the simple box that gets just put together. And but we were not 100% happy with it, because our goal was in the end to try and find ways to produce and manufacture the whole box also locally. So we started with a prototypical phase in Ethiopia, trying to find out what you could produce in Addis. And to our big surprise, it was great to see how many fantastic companies are out there in Addis. And after 3-4 weeks, we realized and found enough collaborating partners that we could say that we produce 50% of all the components locally in Ethiopia, which made us really happy. So all the brown components that you see here are for the first prototypical phase in Ethiopia, built and assembled in Ethiopia. We found our partners, and it was actually a very short process, and found companies like these that look like an aluminum company in Germany, fantastic, in Addis, started to produce components in their premises and also in partner premises, started to build up the kiosks in their fabrication halls, and found ways to also solve the problem of transportation. So here you see one of the first 7 kiosks that we're about to implement in Ethiopia that got set up in a location south of Addis, 5 hours south of Addis Ababa, at Lake Langano, and it was just simply put on a truck and transported down there. With a crane, we put it onto its final destination, and put the battery box in the ground, fixed the solar panels on top, and this all in the middle of rural Africa, with the precision that we had not expected when we started the whole thing. So, a perfect, simple setup of technical components that gets closed and is easy to monitor and maintain. The very contrasting images of local traditions with a high-end, high-tech object, and we felt that they communicate very well with each other, is my feeling. And it was a great, great event to implement this first kiosk and then see it also being inhabited, incorporated, embraced by the local community and the local population. So we had it set up that 5 minutes later it was running, up and running. We sold the first drinks, and people were stopping at the adjacent road all the time and asking what this piece is. But the real mystery, the real magic unfolded, of course, at night. You can imagine that the kiosk starts to be illuminated at night, and it's the only source of light, apart from cars, of course, driving by, in a very, very wide, big radius in this location. So finally, we brought it to work in Lake Langano, found an operator there, who you see standing in his kiosk very happily with his son, and they actually made it 2 weeks later to the German weekly newspaper Spiegel, who were asking, what was happening there, Mr. Dalu Kabato? So, and he told the story of the strange Germans arriving somewhere there and how this changed his life. But to come back to the beginning of that little story, what was really surprising for us was not to make a big plan maybe for cities to grow or like draw it up on a master plan how villages could develop over time, but to think more of strategic tools that should be given to society to grow themselves and to solve the problems and the planning themselves. And since we put this one kiosk up and studied what it could do in the future by, for example, attaching some components to that initial mini structure, we are studying how whole local and rural economies could completely change by using a component that generates its own energy and that feeds back exactly to the local communities that what they need most. So we hope that we have come up with something that will make us learn even more in the future, and that we could use to maybe as a catalyst for rural development, and not as a master plan that gets overthrown over rural areas and communities that need to that want to develop themselves and want to look at a brighter future. So we hope that this project will continue even further, and that maybe we find more people who are deciding to spend not too much money on their beauty products, but maybe on something like this, and that we can, by just supporting growth help more than coming in as a European planner and talking to people how to develop their cities from the top. So I hope this will make our world maybe a little better. Thank you.